Well, good evening and welcome on such a lovely fall night. I'm Patricia McDonald, director at the Wichita Art Museum. It's really wonderful. Fall is in the air, and I am all ready for soup season. I'm thinking again of soup, and that's perfectly timed with this evening because we're going to learn about Andy Warhol's passion for Campbell's soup. So, really pleased with the responses to our fall exhibitions, Shiny, Sticky, Smooth, Pop Art in the Senses. It was fun. I attended the symphony on Saturday night, and I had about 4 museum members who came up to me and were raving and sharing their enthusiasm. So hope all of you in the room too have been able to circuit through the show and got something from it. Of course, people should rave about the show. Our own Wichita Art Museum curator, Lisa Volpe, organized it, selected it. I think she developed really a fascinating new take on pop art. And our installation team, I'm very proud of them again. They did another amazing job. Lisa selected this exhibition entirely from the private collection of a West Coast art collector by the name of Jordan Snitzer. He opened his inventory to her and said, really go for it. This is a man who has an art collection in excess of 9,000 works of art. Yep, exactly. And then the other thing that was for us really so wonderful, very generous and philanthropic individual, the exhibition comes to us at no cost. And additionally, Jordan has contributed for the presentation here in Wichita. So I want to extend deep thanks to Jordan himself, Jordan Snitzer, and his family foundation. The DeVore Foundation also very generously sponsored the exhibition here in Wichita. Additional lead supporters include Charles Baker, Sandra Langle, and Richard Smith. And then we also had others who made crucial contributions, and those individuals include Eric Engstrom and Robert Bell, Sonia Gredeman and Chris Brunner, Helen and Ed Healy, Jeff Kennedy and Patty Gorham, and Trish Higgins. And of course, the Friends of the Wichita Art Museum provide their vital support and wonderful partnership with the museum for all the exhibition projects that we do. So applause for the Friends, and then there are a number of private individuals who also contributed to the show who are in the audience with us tonight. So go team and yay. We were delighted that we could entice the scholar and curator Elizabeth Athens to Wichita, and her talk this evening is titled Andy Warhol's Pleasure with Food, and we're about to learn that one of the prods or inspirations for Warhol to think about Campbell's soup in particular was it really was a very significant comfort food for him. Yes, Warhol, as other pop artists, loved the allure of advertising and mass marketing and found very inventive ways to weave that into their own fine art. But Warhol just got hungry, and he got hungry for Campbell's soup and other things that we're about to learn about, and so he brought that perspective and energy into his work. Elizabeth Athens is here from the Worcester Art Museum in Massachusetts, so just outside of Boston. She's the assistant curator of American Art there. We talked today as she was visiting us with 2 significant projects that she's working on presently. Shortly they will be doing significant reinstallation of the American Art collection in their galleries at Worcester. And so she's newly conceiving how to best present their gems and also finding ways to identify overlooked treasures that are in the vault that just haven't seen the light of day for a long, long time. That's always a really it's a fun project for a curator. And she's working on a Winslow Homer exhibition that's a partnership between her museum in Worcester and the Milwaukee Art Museum. She received her PhD from Yale University. She also holds a master's degree from Williams College in Massachusetts. She had a bachelor degree from Lawrence University, which is in Wisconsin, and she sort of ran the table. They were all in art history. She has held museum positions at such institutions as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Williams College Museum of Art, and the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art. So without further ado, please help me to welcome Elizabeth both to Wichita and to the podium.
Thank you, Patricia, for that really lovely introduction, and thank you for inviting me to the Wichita Art Museum. I keep wanting to say the Worcester Art Museum because we also go by WAM. I'm like, no, I'm not in Worcester, I'm in Wichita. So today we're going to be talking about Andy Warhol's pleasure with food, and I first really got interested in his food imagery when I started collecting mid-century cookbooks. I really like mid-century cookbooks, their fascination with convenience foods, their description of new kitchen technologies, and also the way that they style food in the photographs and the illustrations, like these banana boats and cantaloupes filled with cottage cheese. And I just thought that Andy Warhol's work really kind of dovetailed with some of the things that I was seeing in cookbooks from mid-century. So I just want to start the talk with a little bit of a background on Andy Warhol. As many of you know, he got his start as an illustrator, as a commercial artist, making these whimsical drawings of cars and lips and shoes. Shoes are especially probably one of his most recognized illustrations. And the commercial concerns that were in his advertising work would continue to thread throughout his fine art career, as Patricia mentioned. And this began with his replication of mass-manufactured items and mass-circulated items or images, which we can see in these works. Indeed, his obsession with this kind of surface flash, this consumer culture and celebrity as portrayed in these works of Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe suggests that he was more interested in the promotional image, the advertisement, the spectacle, rather than a so-called authenticity of the fine art object. And when I use this term authenticity, what I'm dealing with is an idea of art and of the art object that was very particular to the 40s and 50s, and that was established by the abstract expressionists. And these are the artists against whom Warhol is he's working with their idea of what art is, and he's also kind of pushing back against it in a particular way. So here we see a work by Jackson Pollock, number 1, 1949, and in the lower left corner we see a photograph of him at work by Hans Nemeth. And this work, it's not representational in any way that we would identify as representational. It looks entirely abstract. And yet at the same time, it was considered this pure expression of the artist. It's his movement around the canvas, his physical gestures as he pours and spills paint on the canvas. In fact, the art critic Hans Rosenberg said that the canvas was an arena in which the artist could act. That's how he described the abstract expressionists. So even though it's not representative of any sort of it doesn't visually recreate reality, it is this full, authentic expression of the physical state, the emotional state of the artist. And so that idea of the art object is what is shaping Andy Warhol's approach to art making. So while the art object in the 50s would suggest something that was deeply authentic, very expressive, advertising, on the other hand, conveyed inauthenticity. It could be an empty representation that often circulated independently from that which it represents. So Warhol is taking these promotional materials of Elvis and Marilyn Monroe and doctoring them and making them into something quite different. his co-opting of these advertising and mass media strategies in his fine art, I would say for me, and I think probably for a lot of people who are just approaching Andy Warhol, it just, like when I first started looking at his stuff, I'm like, what is this? You know, this is like the work of an adolescent prankster. There's like no there. And I think what's interesting is that he really did try to cultivate this idea of emptiness in his work. And it's something that you can see in this 1966 clip from an interview that he did. And could I have you play the clip?
This is like sitting at the World's Fair, riding one of those Ford machines where the voice is behind you. It's so exciting. You don't have to think anything. But you should just tell me the words and I can just repeat them because I can't. I'm so empty today, I can't think of anything. Why don't you just tell me the words and they'll just come out of my mouth?
No, don't worry about it because
No, I think it'd be so nice.
But we'll
We'll
loosen up after a while.
Well, no, it's not that. It's just I can't, I have a cold and I can't think of anything. And it'd be so nice if you told me a sentence. And
Let me ask you some questions that you can answer.
Oh, no, but you repeat the answers too.
All right. Well, I don't know the answer to some of them. You before you started the silkscreen, you made a number of paintings and you made comic strips, right?
Yes, I made comic strips before I did the silkscreen things.
And you made some other paintings of things that were not done mechanically. What were they?
I made, I guess they were ads from magazines.
And then you made...
and then I made...
things like...
So you can imagine how much fun it was to interview Andy Warhol. This interview, I mean, really it's suggesting that Andy Warhol's art simply cannot be about authentic emotion or personal expression, that he's empty, he has a cold, he doesn't have any words, and he confesses he has nothing to say, so he just starts parroting the interviewer. I would like to say, however, it is important to recognize that Warhol's sense of disengagement and almost two-dimensionality is really, in a way, a performance, a construction that is intended to add to his artwork. And in this lecture, I would like to look at 3 examples of his artwork that deal with food. The first is his 1959 cookbook, Wild Raspberries. The second is his Campbell's Soup can paintings from 1961 to 62. And the third is his 1968 television commercial for the Schrafft's chain of diners. And I want to look at these to consider how each might be interpreted as an expression of the artist, as an act of personal expression, even though they don't necessarily seem that way. More importantly, I would like to discuss how mass-marketed food items functioned for Warhol not only as a source of personal pleasure, but almost as a protective device against what he saw as a sometimes hostile and potentially threatening world. So Andy Warhol was born in Pittsburgh. He was the son of Slovakian immigrants. His father died when he was a child, and he lived with his mother. He was very closely connected to his mother. He attended Carnegie Mellon University, where he received a degree in pictorial design, and he moved to New York City in 1949. By 1959, he had made an impressive showing as a commercial artist, a really strong career doing advertisements for such outlets as Glamour magazine, Harper's Bazaar, Tiffany & Co., and Vogue. And these illustrations, as you see, have this kind of sense of handcrafted whimsy. And as you see in these examples, he used a blotting technique. So basically he would draw the design on tracing paper, which is not absorbent, fold it over onto an absorbent paper, and it would transfer the design and give you this kind of broken, chaotic line that you see in these works. And then when they're script, that is usually his mother. His mother, Julia, moved to New York City with him and lived with him for the rest of her life. She didn't speak English very well, but she had this very beautiful kind of looping, lacy script, little cockeyed looking, but So he would write things out and ask her to transcribe them. And then the coloring was usually done by friends and even school children in these coloring parties. He used this kind of assembly line process to create these advertisements that are inherently unique and individual. And this is a process that he would use, or he would use a similar process for the production of his earliest forays into fine art, such as his collaboration with Susie Frankfurt on the cookbook Wild Raspberries. So Frankfurt was originally from Malibu, and she had moved to New York City with the intent of becoming part of its high society. And that's something that very much interested Warhol as well. Like, he was very much drawn to the dazzle and the free flow of cash in these rarefied circles of high society in New York. Frankfurt worked at the advertising agency Young and Rubicam, where she met her husband, and then she later established herself as a well-known interior decorator to the wealthy. She now lives in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. She's kind of given up New York City. In any event, she sought Warhol out in 1959 after seeing an exhibition of his work of all places, an ice cream parlor in New York City. And so they quickly bonded over their shared love of antique jewelry, but also over their mutual interest and kind of sense of alienation from New York's privileged social circles. So the period in which Warhol and Frankfurt collaborated on their cookbook, the late 1950s, this was the beginnings of a backlash against prepared foods, which prepared foods had become enormously popular after World War II. And there was this backlash against them and a turn towards a more elite, if time-consuming, continental cuisine. So keep in mind that Julia Child's, the first volume of her Mastering the Art of French Cooking came out in 1961, and her show The French Chef started in 1963. So responding to this development, Frankfurt and Warhol decided to create a spoof cookbook that satirized the esoteric language and involved labor of such classic French recipe books as the Escoffier Cookbook, A Guide to the Fine Art of Cookery, which was published in English translation in 1941. So most of the 25 recipes in Wild Raspberries, they're actually kind of revisions or like very direct references to the recipes in the Escoffier cookbook, but others just borrow that kind of esoteric language found in there, and rather than celebrating this particular French cuisine, what they do is they underscore the near impossibility of making these dishes, or they describe the proper circumstances for serving these dishes. And sometimes they swap out the fancy ingredients for kind of mundane supermarket staples. So one of my favorite recipes is this one, which is roast Iguana Andalusian, which, as it turns out, is no recipe at all. It's we have this red iguana frozen in rigor mortis, and the text beneath explains, since this reptile is not to be met with on the American market and is only found in better gourmet shops in the Galapagos Islands, it is superfluous to give recipes concerning its preparation. Let it suffice to say they are prepared like the Burmese lizard. So this is not something you can actually eat. It's not something you could even make. And the other recipe is the Salade de Elflanden, which is such a wonderful name. And of course, as I'm sure this audience knows, it's named for Alf Landon, the governor of Kansas, who lost the 1936 presidential race to Franklin Roosevelt. Now, this recipe is a little less esoteric, but still a deeply involved process. So we have this dish. It's a towering arch of aspic and lobster tails festooned with a bouquet of asparagus tips and hard-boiled plover's eggs. Now, the dish is clearly a challenge to make. Not only does it have some difficult-to-source ingredients, it seems to defy gravity. It is also impossible to serve properly. It is, as the recipe states, best suited for political dinners in the 1930s. So, slightly problematic. And what I find, what I thought was a really interesting kind kind of commentary is that Republicans were not especially keen on their nominee in the 1936 election, and Landon used the Kansas sunflower as the symbol of his campaign, and the Republican base didn't think that he could really take on the Great Depression, and so they created their own pins with the sunflower saying, "You can't eat sunflowers, disgusted Republican, let's lose with Landon." So again, this recipe refers to a politician who, is kind of supporting this, or not able to address the lack of food, the need, the hunger in his community. So the fact that they're creating a recipe that you can't even make or serve is, I think, an interesting association that they're making here. So in a reversal of the preceding two recipes, another delightful one is the simplicity of the A&P surprise, which is actually a surprise. I mean, it doesn't require an iguana, it doesn't require plover's eggs. Instead, all you need is a 2-day-old sponge cake from the A&P, rum, confectioner's sugar, fruit, jam, and pastry cream, and this dessert is a breeze. It's a reprieve from the impossible to make, or at least impossible to serve dishes, by using mass-marketed foodstuffs to create a comforting dessert that you can actually consume. So while Wild Raspberries is this kind of cheeky satire on Americans' pursuit of continental dining, Warhol's Campbell's Soup paintings, I would say, are the artist's earnest approach to food. They're something that are celebratory rather than ironic. These paintings were spurred, Warhol claimed, by his daily habit of eating a bowl of soup and a sandwich for lunch. And the Campbell's can became the focus of much of his work by early 1961 when he began producing these multiple portrait-style paintings. And he, of course, he likes the different flavors, like the mock turtle soup was one of his favorites because it's so hard to get. Anyway, so in creating these works, what he would do is he would project an image of the can that he had taken from a magazine advertisement. He would project it on a pre-stretched canvas. He'd lightly trace the outline and then methodically paint in the areas of color. So really trying to avoid the sense of brushstroke or anything like that, really trying to make it look as mechanical as possible. The sheer flatness of the painted can with its hard edges, its planes of pure color, and the sharp stylized reflections along the bottom and top edges conveys a sense of mechanical reproduction, not unlike the printing process that was used for the magazine illustration. So at first these works, they just seem, they're representations of representations. It's like a hall of mirrors in which the origin of the reflection becomes indistinguishable from its offspring, and there doesn't appear to be any sense of personal connection. And as many scholars have observed, advertising aims not to sell a specific object, but rather an idea that can only be accessed through that object. In this case of the Campbell's Soup advertisement, that idea is that is represented is not the soup itself, but really the abstractions of home, of goodness, of family felicity. The soup itself becomes a stand-in for these abstract concepts, as well as the medium by which they are attained. And as the soup, what we might initially consider as the basis of the advertisement is overshadowed by the idea of the product. This attempt to access some personal meaning in Warhol's Campbell's Soup paintings becomes even more challenging and more difficult. So Warhol, in crafting the painting's pseudo-mechanical appearance, seemed disinclined to offer us viewers any assistance in this. Indeed, his Campbell's Soup cans initially appear to be an extension or an intensification of the representational strategies of the advertisement, an idea that is buttressed by the artist's method of projecting and tracing the source image. Yet despite the painting's flatness and minimization of brushstroke, it still bears indications of the artist's interventions or manipulations. So in this example, the most noticeable is the reduction of this golden Campbell seal to a smooth disc, which you can see by comparing it to the advertisement here. And so that's clearly an intervention on Warhol's part. And you can also get a sense of this by the weave of the canvas, which unfortunately you can't see in this illustration, but in person you'd be able to see the weave of the canvas, the dimpling of the canvas. And that was another choice on Warhol's part. Like he could have made it even more mechanical looking. He could have primed the canvas to make it a smooth surface and conceal the pattern of its warp and weft. But he's really, in some ways, calling attention to the materials that he's using. So on closer analysis, Warhol's early soup cans are most assuredly not, like the magazine illustration, mechanical reproductions. They're artistic reproductions of mass-produced articles. So despite their strange kind of hall of mirrors effect as representations of representations, their subject matter and, in fact, their very materiality of paint on canvas suggests how they may be considered a personal expression of the artist. With the Painted Soup Can series, Warhol intensified the profound connection between artist and artwork upon which personal expression depends. The soup, he stated, was his daily lunch. So in doing this, he inserted this spark of an emotional charge to the object that he so repetitiously depicts, just as his use of a traditional fine art medium makes him part of a long genealogy of artists. Though he seems to be working against or at odds with the idea of art as promoted by the abstract expressionists, these paintings are as much an expression of his emotional state and bodily actions, his actual consumption of soup, as Jackson Pollock's drip paintings. And I just wanted to show this work because this one is really very much in dialogue with the abstract expressionists with the peeling label, and then you have the kind of abstract scattered pigment of the soup can surface. So he's really working in dialogue with the abstract expressionists. That the Campbell's Soup painting is both a point in a series of representations, as well as a form of personal expression, highlights the overlap of the commercial and the artistic within Warhol's body of work, and it's something that he really was interested in and really worked toward. So while this interplay is evident in the paintings themselves, it is cast in higher relief when considered in the context of the Bianchini Gallery's 1964 exhibition, American Supermarket. So for this exhibition, this is a gallery space. The gallery was fashioned to resemble a supermarket with signs denoting aisles for eggs and fresh fruit, bread. There were freezer sections and stacks of canned goods. And within this setting, art objects, including Warhol's Campbell's Soup paintings and his Brillo boxes, were placed on display. The photographs taken at the exhibition reveal what a dizzying blur of art and advertising this was. And in the photograph on the right, this was published in Life magazine, we see a woman standing under the painting, which is what's being sold at the exhibition, but she's looking at the soup, like, I don't know, should I get this? I don't like this flavor, So it creates this very interestingly confused or muddled atmosphere of what is art and what is advertising and what exactly is for sale. So in the context of the American Supermarket exhibition, the cans of soup, like the painting, ultimately become a representation of Warhol himself. And while this reversal is heightened in the Bianchini Gallery's simulated atmosphere of a grocery store, it continued beyond the gallery walls. As Warhol's soup can works gained prevalence within mass culture, Campbell's Soup came to represent Warhol as much as Warhol represented Campbell's Soup. So these early years of the 1960s were hugely transformative for Warhol. In addition to his impressive showing at the Bianchini Gallery in 1964 and his accepted arrival in the American art world, he also established his studio, The Factory, on East 47th Street. And it was here in the factory that he began experimenting in other media, and most particularly film. His forays into cinema were often plotless affairs that explored issues of spectacle and attention. His 1964 film, Empire, for which you see a still here, consists of 8 hours and 5 minutes of continuous footage of the Empire State Building. So you're lucky we're not screening that here tonight. Now, the building, then as now, is an icon of the Manhattan skyline and a celebrated tourist site. Yet this exceptionally long take undermines its status as spectacle. The film operates in a register of unrelenting boredom. What should seem exciting or riveting eventually becomes more and more mundane with each passing hour. His film Eat, produced in the same year, in 1964, functions in the same way. And so in this work, he films the artist Robert Indiana eating a mushroom. And the film is 45 minutes. And it is spliced together in a way that there's no possible narrative that you can construct because, so you can't be like, oh, well, he's almost done with his mushroom, so this is going to be over soon, because he'll be eating his mushroom, it'll look like it's almost done, and then it's back again, and you're like, how did this happen? So I just want to show this little bit of a clip to give you a sense of what this film is like, and it's a slow, it's much slower than it was actually filmed in. So, and I picked it because I like the cat. So there you go. So imagine 45 minutes of that. Yeah. So Warhol's filmmaking, he was very invested in it, and it yielded both risk and opportunity for him. The risk was it drew a huge number of people to the factory, to his studio, superstars, drug addicts, and so on, as well as the radical feminist Valerie Solanas. Solanas, frustrated at Warhol's indifference to her screenwriting, decided to kill him, and she shot him in June of 1968. The shooting seriously wounded Warhol. Actually, they did not think that he would live. They had to kind of squeeze his heart to get it to start pumping again, and he was hospitalized for nearly 2 months. He suffered pain for the rest of his life. He had to wear, you can see, a surgical corset for the rest of his life, and even years later, his wounds, if he overexerted himself, they would start to bleed. So there was this risk, of course, but at the same time there was this opportunity that opened up to him through his filmmaking. It led to his collaboration with the Schrafft's chain of diners and allowed him more fully to marry his dual concerns of advertising and art. So a brief 5.5 months after his shooting, so just 3.5 months after he got out of the hospital, Warhol created a 60-second television ad for Schrafft's. The Schrafft's advertisement was commissioned by F. William Free and Company, then in charge of the chain's campaign to rejuvenate the Schrafft's image, which had been identified primarily as a family-friendly, plain food ice cream parlor. And you can see that in the photo on the left. We have the soda fountain, the bakery, candies, etc. According to a Time magazine article in October of 1968, the strategies that Schrafft's used to produce an edgier image included these kind of hip television commercials, as well as renovations of several individual restaurants in order to place emphasis on the wet bar rather than the soda fountain. And so you see there the Columbus Room Bar and Cocktail Lounge. So that's what they were really trying to do, make it very hip. So the Warhol Spot, and which I'm going to have to confess to you right now, I am unable to show you the spot because I have not been able to find it. I have only found the still, and I actually, when this talk was promoted, I got a call from somebody in Canada, like in Toronto. He's like, are you going to be showing that commercial? Is it going to be live streamed? And I was like, I can't find the commercial. I've looked everywhere. I was like, if you find it, let me know. So we're just going to have to go with the still. But any event. This was part of the campaign strategy, and at first it seems quite different than Wild Raspberries or even the Campbell's Soup campaignings of 1961 or 62. It was, rather than being created from an independent impetus, like Warhol's own interest, the work stemmed from an invitation from an outside source. Yet, even as it suggests this wholesale capitulation to the commercial, for Warhol, as for Schrafft's, it retained this position as a work of art. When questioned about the advertisement, Frank Shattuck II, owner of the Schrafft's chain, stated, "We haven't got just a commercial. We've acquired a work of art." Shattuck's promotion of the advertisement as art is reinforced by Warhol's intent to continue in this medium. He affirms his desire to turn out a full-length videotape movie and then later states, "My movies have been working towards TV. It's the new everything. No more books or movies, just TV." And I just wanted to show you this ad because I think it's so fantastic. They have an ad for their ad. That's bananas. You know, they're like, no, this is when you can tune in to see this particular commercial. So how then does this commercial, this television advertisement, function as a work of art in the romantic sense of personal expression, as we were talking about with the abstract expressionists? I mean, really, it seems not personal at all. The commercial is a minute-long examination of a psychedelically colored chocolate sundae that attempts to mimic the distorted colors of a mistuned television set. During this kind of explosion of color, there's a banner that runs diagonally across the screen that reads, "The chocolate sundae was photographed for Schrafft's by Andy Warhol." So the scrolling banner identifies the advertisement as art by virtue of its association with a well-known artist. It fully collapses its artistic identity with the commercial endeavor. It's represented with its representation. The advertisement with its scrolling banner attributing authorship to Warhol not only signifies the artist's affiliation with Schrafft's, but is in fact that affiliation. So that this TV spot seems entirely disconnected from any personal impetus, such as the one that shaped his Campbell's Soup paintings, this isn't quite the case. Warhol saw Schrafft's as a place of comfort and familiarity. He waxed poetic of the chain's food and the atmosphere it offered, casting it as palliative, a source of comfort in a rapidly changing world. The artist said of Schrafft's, no matter what changes or how fast, the one thing we all always need is real good food so we can know what the changes are and how fast they're coming. Food, and especially mass-marketed food, is a powerful leveling device in which Warhol finds great comfort. You can be watching TV and see Coca-Cola, and you can know that the president drinks Coke, Liz Taylor drinks Coke, and just think you can drink Coke too, he remarked. A Coke is a Coke, and no amount of money can get you a better Coke than the one the bum on the corner is drinking. And it's here that I wish to make my point about Warhol's relationship to food. His embrace of mass-marketed comestibles was not just a source of pleasure, but in many ways it was also a defensive act, a way of kind of filling the grooves that delineated the social and cultural divisions of 1960s America. As scholars have asserted, Warhol's homosexuality, his working-class immigrant origins, placed him self-consciously beyond the bounds of the socially acceptable in the 1960s, making his dependence on commonalities all the more important. One can be a bum or a president or a queer working-class first-generation American, yet you can still drink Coke, still enjoy Campbell's Soup, and still head to Schrafft's for fudge sundaes. In Warhol's soup can paintings of 1961 to 62 and his later Underground Sunday commercial for Schrafft's, his use of food imagery can be viewed almost as a hedge against his fears of social rejection. So although a self-protective undercurrent courses through Warhol's use of mass-marketed food imagery, regardless of media, in his Schrafft's commercial, medium and ostensible subject matter cohere to create a more overt and obvious defense for the artist. Just as Warhol drew on food-related imagery as a means of insulating himself from a potentially threatening world, he often combined this imagery with the defensive mechanism he found in television. For Warhol, television was a way in which he could distance himself, yet still remain somehow engaged in a disapproving and potentially threatening reality. The television screen serves as an intermediary and as a defense. He said, "Before I was shot, I always thought that I was more half there than all there. I always suspected that I was watching TV rather than living life. People sometimes say the way things happen in movies is unreal, but actually it's the way things happen to you in life that's unreal. Right when I was being shot, and ever since, I knew that I was watching television." So just as food imagery serves as an indicator of shared social territory with the bum or the president, television provides a similar thread of commonality, all the while maintaining a safe distance between the viewer and the viewed. That Warhol should combine television and commercial food items, or television and the traditional dining chain, seems actually a logical step. Underground Sunday is perhaps the first instance in which Warhol wed the two, but it was not the last. In a 1974 issue of Home and Garden, Warhol unfolded his vision of the ideal restaurant, which he called an Andy Mat. He said, they're for people who eat alone. You sit at a little table, order up any sort of frozen food you want, and watch TV at the same time. So frozen food in these pre-packaged little foil cartons would be kind of shunted to you through these pneumatic tubes, and you would be watching this constant stream of television programming that would assuage your feelings of isolation through these common meals and common entertainment. And yet, at the same time, it provided this buffer against possible rejection from peers or hostile threats or so on. And the first 115-seat location of Warhol's imagined fast food empire was actually slated to open at 933 Madison Avenue in 1977. But alas, investors pulled funding before it could be realized. So we have this photograph, but no actual restaurant. So Warhol's use of food imagery and his exploration of television as an artistic medium is closely, I would say, connected to the trauma that he suffered after the Salana shooting. In light of this trauma, television became a protective armature. Prior to the shooting, he said he sensed reality was like television. Despite threats and moments of danger, he had always viewed it as unreal. Afterwards, however, in the painful apprehension that these perilous elements were real and threatening, he said he knew that he was watching television, reconsidering and refashioning reality not to seem like television, but to be television. This passage points to Warhol's recognition of his vulnerability and his desire to meld anonymously into the masses, to be part of a large protean group, disembodied and consequently free from bodily threat. So I would like to conclude this paper with this presentation with what I see as a brilliant coda to Warhol's concern with mass-marketed food, aesthetic beauty, and emotional comfort. And this is a film produced by the contemporary Danish artist York and Yale as part of his larger work, 66 Scenes from America. So I'm going to show this clip, and it's York and Yale describing what's going on, and just so that, well, carry on, play the video.
Da han går i gang, så er det jo virkelig med det samme. Der er ikke noget, man kan ikke tage det om. Det er one take, og det er en del af hans kunst. Han kan ikke sådan gøre det bedre undervejs. Det skal udspille sig i et stykke, ligesom en ballet udspille sig i et stykke. Men jeg havde jo glemt at stille vand til ham, eller noget at drikke, og det viser sig meget hurtigt, at det er jo en forfærdelig, pinefuld manglende beslutningskraft. Det er også en forhindring, at han har fået en helt ny flaske ketchup, som han har svært ved at få ketchupen ud af flasken. Og det ser man jo, at han sidder og prøver at få det ud, og så siger han, det siger han med meget lav stemme, hvis man hører efter, så kan man høre, at han siger det. It doesn't come out. Og der tænkte jeg, at det er jo sgu også tarveligt af mig, at ikke tænke på, at han har stillet en flaske, der åbner sig med det samme. Der er en del udfordringer, et ord, man bruger meget nu om dagen. Altså, der er en del udfordringer til ham i hele den akt, som den er stillet op. I al sin enkelhed, så rummer den mange forhindringer. Jeg oplever det sådan, at Warhol han er en slags helgen, eller det er næsten et Jesusbillede, den måde han lider på. Den måde hans smalle hals tydeligvis har svært ved at fordøje burgeren, som glider ned i hans svælg. Det er meget, synes jeg, martyrjagtigt i virkeligheden, det han laver, det der sker. Man kan se hans øjne flakker rundt i lokalet, og han beslutter sig undervejs. Man kan se hans tanker meget tydeligt. Hele hans måde at bevæge sig på er lidt specielt kantet og meget smuk, synes jeg også. Meget smuk gestik, som en pantomime-danser eller sådan noget. Det er ikke nogen bevidsthed. Det er ikke, fordi han vil gøre det smukkere, end det er. Det er bare hans måde at være på. Han er fuldstændig transparent i den situation. fuldstændig transparens, og som jeg oplever det, som en helgen, altså som en mand, der er ude på en meget vanskelig opgave. Og så til allersidst, så pakker han det hele sammen på en fantastisk fysisk måde, en meget skulpturel måde, synes jeg. Og putter det ud til siden, så bordet ser flot ud, ryddet og meget smukt, som en koreografi, synes jeg. Til sidst sidder han med sine hænder på bordet, og de ting står ude til siden, og det er stadigvæk et fuldt billede. De er stadigvæk med inden billedkanten. Det er meget smukt, synes jeg. Det der tableau, der han selv skaber med sine hænder og med sin person. Og til sidst så ser man ham sidde uden at sige noget som helst. Hans øjne flakker, og man føler, at han lider. Efter der er gået nøjagtigt 45 sekunder, så siger han sætningerne.
My name is Andy Warhol, and I just finished eating a hamburger.
So Warhol agreed to be filmed eating a hamburger, and he arrived at Let's studio, noticeably surrounded by his bodyguards, an important development after the Solana shooting. And when he got there, he asked, "Where's the McDonald's?" And Let confessed that he had his assistants avoid any clearly marked packaging, except for the Burger King. And Warhol explained that McDonald's was the most beautiful of all fast foods. But as we saw here, Warhol graciously agreed to eat a Burger King hamburger to create this personally expressive artwork by combining the medium of video with the mass-produced foodstuff. Thank you. So I'm sure we have time for questions if anybody has any, or if anybody just wants to run out and get some McDonald's or Campbell's Soup. I understand. Yeah, Patricia. That's a good question, and I actually don't know. So I would have to check. That's a great question. Yeah.
What's the significance of the underground? With the underground advertising, didn't he do the banana for the Velvet Underground band?
Yeah, so this idea of being a kind of counterculture. But for Warhol, it was always, that in a way became his cachet, was being counterculture. But really he wanted to be part of mass culture. He didn't want to necessarily be counterculture. So I don't know that the underground was his own titling of the Schrafft's commercial, but Schrafft's was like trading on that for their promotion. Yeah.
Do you know anything about his proclivity maybe for collecting things, saving things?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, so that's the thing. When I was looking for his, when I was looking for the clip of the commercial, trying to locate it, and I called around everywhere, like F. William Free & Co., which was the advertising company that commissioned the spot. They're out of business, but they were bought by another advertising agency, and so I contacted their archives. I contacted archives in Durham, North Carolina, the Museum of the Moving Picture archives in California. I contacted the Warhol. And my guess is that it's at the Warhol, but they have all of these time capsules. He would create these time capsules, just put all of the stuff in there and seal it up. And they're at the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, and they just don't know what's in all of them. So I believe it's probably in one of those. But yeah, he collected a lot of things. It's insane. Yeah.
In his paintings of the Campbell's Soup cans, I know you said he used a projector, but you know what kind of medium he used? Was it oil, acrylic?
It was, well, let's just go back. Casein, I think? Yeah. I think it was Kaysen. And I also want to point out, he started out doing paintings of these cans, but then he started doing silkscreens. So they weren't, he started pursuing them in a, in a more mechanically reproduced way by doing silkscreen. Yeah.
You said he moved to New York City in 1949, and
Right.
in 1950 he was producing some well-known pieces.
1959.
59.
Yeah. He was great, but no, it wasn't quite that shooting to stardom. I mean, but he was really he did very well as a commercial artist before he became a fine artist. I mean, really the early '60s is when he is identified as a fine artist, but he was a go-to guy for a lot of people. Yeah.
One of the more interesting exhibits I have seen of Warhol was at Brandywine, isn't that where the Wyeth Museum is? The MC, Andrew, and Jamie Wyeth and their museum. There was a special exhibit when I was there. I didn't know this, but Warhol invited Jamie Wyeth to join him at the factory to paint there, and they had examples of side by side of the way the two painted the same subject. Like, for example, they both painted a portrait of Arnold Schwarzenegger. These were hanging side by side so you could see them.
Oh, that would have been, I wish I had seen that. That sounds fantastic. Any other questions? Well, okay. Yeah.
Just a nut and bolt question. Your home museum, how does it compare in size to the Wichita Museum?
How does it compare in size? I think it's about the same size. It's a mid-size museum. I was just talking to Patricia about this, and she was asking me how big our collection was and how many square feet, and I'm like, I don't know. I should know those numbers, but I do I do believe it's comparable in size. It's encyclopedic, but instead of having, say, 10 Winslow Homers, we have 2, and so it's on a smaller scale. Yeah.
What happened to the woman who shot him?
Oh, she went to jail. She died in 1988. And there is actually a film about her called I Shot Andy Warhol. She was really pretty loopy. She developed a manifesto, the Scum Manifesto, which was, I think, Start Cutting Up Men is what the Scum stood for. It was very, she was, not all there. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to thank you again for inviting me to come and speak. It was really a pleasure. A lot of fun to think about Warhol again and talk about Warhol with all of you. So if you have any questions and want to just come up to me later, that's fine too. So thanks again.